Hey everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part. And then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So actually, I am going to start with the joke, which is really not my style, but I thought this kind of went along with the theme in this video. So the joke was, it starts out with, why was 9 afraid? And you probably heard this joke before. Well, 9 was afraid because 7, 8, 9. Okay. And then there's an addition to the joke, and it says, why was 10 afraid? Well, 10 was afraid because it was between 9, 11, and 11. So pretty crazy, huh? Okay, so today we're going to talk about the rest of October and probably the beginning of November, and then what may be coming next. Okay, so so I want to bring up verses that kind of show us Trump doing some Antichrist things, because there's not a lot of people on YouTube talking about Trump being the Antichrist. And so I think a lot of the prophets and pastors of our day are missing it, because I think they're under that deluding influence of the Antichrist. And so they don't see that Trump's the Antichrist, even though in my mind it's pretty obvious that he's the Antichrist and that his system is the Babylon system, the Babylon economic system. And it was interesting because I was reading on the internet, and like I think I was reading some Reddit post, and there was one guy who said, I'm an atheist, but even I believe Trump's the Antichrist. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So it's interesting when you have a lot of people outside the church believing that. So I thought that was interesting. So we want to make sure the Bible tells us, do not be deceived in the last days. Okay, so we do not want to be deceived by a person who well, just makes a lot of lies. Okay, we don't want to be falling for someone who's making promises, like, for example, making promises of peace when he's not really accomplishing peace. So you got to be really careful. But if you listen to my videos, you'll find out different ways that Trump does Antichrist things. Okay. So on October 16th, we saw that former White House National Security Advisor John Bolton was indicted on 18 counts related to the improper handling of classified materials. Fox News Digital has learned. Okay, so interesting that they're going after him for improper handling of classified materials when we didn't see a whole lot happen to Trump, who had a bathroom full of classified materials. So definitely interesting. But we read in Luke 21 that it says, these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. So we are seeing with Trump that he is a man of vengeance, and so he is going after his enemies, and we see that happening. Okay, and it's interesting that that's verse 22, because 22 is equivalent to the 8th day of the Jewish holidays, and so that would connect to the 8th king, which connects to Trump. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. And then here, oh man, this is a big way that Trump's the Antichrist. Okay, so what did we see? Is okay, so Cruz demolished part of White House to build Trump's ballroom. Okay, so one of the things is, and I got fooled by his lie, because Trump had said actually earlier that the White House, that building this ballroom wasn't going to affect the White House, that he was just going to build it next to it. So then I just didn't really think about it until I saw this picture. And it's like, oh my gosh, he lied about that. And so what we see is broken windows, which in this picture, which is interesting. Okay, so this is the east wing of the White House that got torn down, okay, by Trump. Okay. And so we see broken windows, which the reason why I think that's significant is I think that Jesus is the door and Trump is the window. Okay. So people are trying to get into the kingdom through the window, through Trump. And God says you can't get in any other way except through the door. Okay. And so the East Wing, they said it was the First Lady's staff offices, but I think there was more to it too. I think that was where the tour started. And so I think it, it was more important than just staff offices. Because I actually heard that, I think it was Harris that said it was kind of the heart of the White House. So definitely really sad. So what's really ironic is that we heard Trump wanted to put the National Guard in Portland, and he said his reasoning for that is he wanted to protect federal assets. Well, very ironic because he can't even protect the federal assets under his own power, such as the White House. Okay. But we read in Revelation 17:11, it says, the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. Okay. So the phrase about he was and is not, that has to do with, so Trump was president for a time, and then he wasn't president for a time, but then he came back to be the eighth king, the way that I've been counting it. Which is working out really well. And so he was, and then he wasn't. So that's part of the problem when all the people talk about the head wound, is they don't realize that a head wound applies to you, a person losing their authority. So Trump lost his authority for a season before he came back. Okay. And we've seen him going to destruction. So it's just amazing to me that he tore down this part of the White House with that there was no vote, nothing. He just did it. And it, and so to me that's very destructive. And so it's interesting too, because everyone wants to say he's a big friend of Israel. Well, he's not even a friend of his own country. He doesn't have respect for the history in his own country. Why would he have respect for Israel? So on October 20th, it says, demolition began on Monday to replace the White House East Wing with a new $250 million state ballroom. According to Trump, the room, which will cover approximately 90,000 total square feet and have a seated capacity of 650 people, would give the White House the space to host major functions honoring world leaders and other countries without having to install a large and unsightly tent approximately 100 yards away from the main building entrance. Okay, so I should have highlighted this part where it says, give the White House space to host major functions honoring world leaders. So Trump wants to hang around with the world leaders and have, dinners, state dinners, and whatever, dances and stuff with world leaders. Okay, so if that's not a clue about him being the Antichrist, you're not paying attention. So, and so we read in Daniel 11:37, it says, he will show no regard for the God of his fathers or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any God, for he will magnify himself above all. Okay, So he didn't care. Okay, so what's important to understand is that the Jewish people are like the men, and the Christians are like the women. Okay, so like the Christians are like the bride of Christ. Um, and so a lot of people have used this verse to say, um, see, the Antichrist is going to be gay. Okay, that's not what it's saying. Okay, it says he will show no regard for the God of his fathers or for the desire of women. So he doesn't care what people in America or what the Christians care about in America. Okay, so he just knocked down this um, part of the White House, which has a lot of historical significance. Okay, um, so um, people that really care about America are crushed that he did this. Um, and it also says he will show no regard for the God of his fathers. Um, and so basically, Trump doesn't value what God values. Okay. And so Trump's not really following the God of the fathers of this nation. Okay. Um, and I mean, because let's face it, Trump is into grandiosity, world leaders and 990,000 total square feet. Um, um, he's into money. He's into all the things that God and Jesus are not into. Okay, money and prestige and titles and on and on and on. Okay. And so this one, I like this one too. In July 2025, this thing that Trump too kind of went under the radar. Like a lot of what Trump does is going under the radar because people are afraid to say anything bad about him. And so Trump actually paved over the grass in the Rose Garden. Okay, and Jacqueline Kennedy set up the Rose Garden. Okay. Um, and I saw the pictures of it. Like, so the Rose Garden, before it was paved over, was just a really nice grassy area. Um, and, so I guess they would have events there. And Trump was saying, oh, the grass, the women's high heels sink into the grass. So that was like his reasoning for paving it over. I mean, so now it just doesn't look as nice. Okay. And so I believe that Jackie Kennedy is rolling over in her grave. There is a great video on YouTube that you should watch that talks. It's Jackie Kennedy doing an interview about how she was like. So when she became um, the president's wife, the first lady, I mean, so she had actually recognized how they weren't really kind of keeping track of the historical stuff, and there actually wasn't a lot of historical stuff in the White House at that time. And so she actually took it upon herself to start bringing in historical stuff and start cataloging stuff. And so it's a great video of what she did. But then if you watch that, you're going to be even sadder that Trump tore down the East Wing. Okay. And so then, in Luke 12, it says, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. And he told them a parable. So this is Jesus. Jesus said, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Okay, so can you see how Trump is the rich man, okay? And so what does the rich man do? He tears down the smaller stuff to build larger stuff, okay? That is so Trump, okay? And what does the rich man want to do? He wants to um, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, that's why Trump's building this ballroom, to eat, drink, and be merry, okay? And to have all these heads of state come and tell him what a great person he is, okay? Um, and so it was interesting. I highlighted 20 because 1020 is when Trump started destroying the East Wing, okay? Um, so I believe it's interesting because I do believe that Trump's like in his last days, okay? And so he's walking around being like this rich man when, um, God's going to require his soul at any minute. So, okay. And then I think too, Trump's fulfilling Daniel 9:27, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So we'll talk about that part later. But it says, on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. The one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So, so it talks about the wing of abominations. And so it's interesting to me that it was the east wing that was destroyed. Okay. And then, but also the rose garden was destroyed. Okay. Um, and then, so another desolation of Trump is the US shutdown. Okay. We also see him blowing up boats in Venezuela. Okay. So he's making desolate wherever he goes. Okay. Whatever he puts his hand to. And I didn't list here. Oh, I really should have listed here too. So one of his big desolations was, so the ceasefire in Israel. Israel was so close to defeating Hamas, and Trump put a stop to that. And then now all these terrorists and murderers, Palestinian terrorists and murderers, were released from prison. And so Israel and the West Bank now are dangerous places. Okay, so another desolation of Trump. Okay. And then on 9/25, Trump won't allow the West Bank to be annexed. Okay. So what's interesting about the West Bank is the West Bank name is a misnomer. It's an anti-Semitic name. Okay, and it's actually on the east side of um, Israel, and so you could say it's the East Wing. So it's another East Wing that Trump is, like destroying by not allowing it to be annexed. Okay. So lots of abominations on the wings, okay, of Trump, okay. And then I thought too, this building being torn down could be kind of a foreshadow of fallen is Babylon, okay. So remember too, the east is like a picture of the right, okay. So this is actually setting up a shadow of that Trump and the right are gonna fall. Okay. Okay, so then we see that so at the end of October we were hearing about how the food stamps are gonna go away in November. Okay. And so I highlighted this part where it says, unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. So we are going to have people starve if they don't get their food stamps. And there's a bunch of other reasons why God would want to shorten the days that we're in, is because America under Trump, so Trump says he's going to send troops to what country is that? There's a place that's suffering Christian persecution, and Trump said he was going to send troops there. But in Sudan too, there's Christian persecution. So because we have Trump just doing a lot of lawlessness, lawlessness has really grown in the world. Okay, and Christians are really being persecuted around the world. But plus, there's also been a huge growth of anti-Semitism. Um, and so kind of like if God allows the days to continue, all his people are going to get killed, Christians and Jews. And so God needs to shorten these days. And so the shortening of the days too would also, um, um, you know, match this part about, okay, what I just said it over here, where Israel is now more dangerous because all those terrorists have been released from prison. Okay. Um, anyways, so one of the things I wanted to give you a little bit of encouragement from the Bible about the food stamps going away is remember that, okay, so Jesus said to his disciples in Luke 12, "For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds." Okay, so God knows that we need food and knows that we need clothing. Okay, so trust in God's plan. Okay. And then, okay, so then at the end of October, October 31st, so I thought this was very interesting. So we're in the 40th year of Back to the Future. The movie was released July 3rd, 40 years ago. Okay. Or July 4th. No, I think it was July 3rd. So anyways, we're in the 40th year, and they chose to re-release it in the theaters on October 31st. Okay, so this is the poster from it. So it says "Feel the Flux." Back in theaters October 31st. And the reason why that stands out to me is, well, two reasons. One is I see a lot of prophetic shadows in that movie. Okay, and I talk about them a lot in my videos. Okay. And then the other thing too, the 40th anniversary, to me that's interesting because we're approaching the 40th day of the shutdown. Okay. But also on November 7th was the 40th day after Trump and Netanyahu announced this ceasefire, the 20-point ceasefire plan. Okay. So I think the number 40 is really significant. Okay, so we want to pay attention to, like 40 days, the 40-day anniversaries and stuff. Okay, so here's another way we see Trump fulfilling the Antichrist. So Revelation 13:11 talks about the beast from the earth. Okay, it says, "I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to earth in the presence of men." Okay, so fire coming down out of heaven. So sometimes God uses real what do you call it, like poetic words to describe things. Okay, but to really understand what they mean, we got to think of more like practical stuff. So fire coming down out of heaven could be bombs coming down from airplanes. Okay, and so we saw that on June 21st of this year. They had Operation Midnight Hammer in Iran, and that's when America was bombing the Iranian nuclear sites. Okay, so that's one way Trump was causing fire to come down out of heaven. And then now we've seen that Trump's been bombing the boats in Venezuela. Okay, so a couple days ago when I put these slides together, they said there was 16 strikes since early September that killed at least 65 people. Um, and I have a huge problem with him bombing boats in Venezuela. Um, and other people do too. I think that's a very antichrist type behavior. Um, anyways, and this beast from the earth that has two horns, the two horns could be Trump and Netanyahu. And so we saw, I mean, we definitely see Netanyahu. He was also bombing Iran. And then we also know that Israel's been bombing in Gaza. So he is also kind of fulfilling some of the beasts from the earth. Okay, so even though I think Trump ultimately is the Antichrist and the beast from earth, but Trump and Netanyahu, there's so many similarities. Okay, now so I got this off of Reddit, a Reddit post, and I should have put the guy's name down who posted it, to give him some credit, but I didn't. So he was answering, someone was talking about like their mom was a MAGA person and didn't believe that Trump was the Antichrist. So he said, okay, while this doesn't apply to your mom, use the Bible to help MAGA Christians understand what they support. Okay, so this person actually did this list of ways he thought Trump was being the Antichrist. And I actually haven't looked up all these verses. To see if I agree kind of like how he's applying them. But a lot of the stuff he came up with is really good, so he said, is he the boaster speaking of his own greatness? Yes, Trump does that. Is he the arrogant one? Yes, Trump does that. Is he a pathological liar? Well, like I said, he lied about the White House not going to be affected by the new ballroom. Is he the builder of towers? Yes, he builds towers all over the place. Even though I'm not really sure where in the Bible that it specifically says the Antichrist is the builder of towers. But there's like directly, but there is definitely a kind of a hidden metaphor about someone who builds towers. Okay. And then does he routinely break treaties? I like with the ceasefire, like Trump says a lot of things that he ends up not following up on. And so so far up to this point, Hamas hasn't gotten any Hamas has been able to get away with not returning the dead bodies of the Jewish hostages right away. And so Trump is one of those people that he'll say things that don't really mean a whole lot. So anyways, but it's interesting just looking at this Daniel 9:27. That's the one that, see, I don't even think the beginning of that verse applies to the Antichrist. And we're getting to that. We'll talk about that. Okay, and then does he demand worship constantly? I think that's really true about Trump. If you say bad stuff about him, he gets all bent out of shape. Is he the man of sin and son of perdition? Definitely see that. Does he brag to be the chosen one? Definitely saw lots of that. Is he the lawless one? Yes, I think so. Is he deceitful and attempts to lure the church into following him? So I really believe, so when he was first running, we were all kind of snookered into believing that he was a Christian. And so it took me a while to kind of recognize that that wasn't true. Okay. And then does he show no compassion and no empathy? I think this is really true about people on the right. Okay, because when Trump's talking about the immigrants and stuff, he makes them out to all be like criminals. When there's some that actually are fleeing, bad countries, fleeing persecution and stuff. And so we don't see Trump in his policies displaying any kind of compassion or empathy. He just wants to get rid of all the immigrants, rather than whether they have a good reason for being here or not. Okay. Rather than, like, really, we need to be looking at their individual situations. Okay. Is he the destroyer? Yes. Does he constantly try to make himself look great? Yes. Okay, so then here's what the guy said. Donald Trump is the exact opposite of Jesus Christ, don't you think? Jesus was poor, Trump was born rich. Jesus was meek, Trump is a bully. Jesus came here to bring hope and solidarity. Trump is the great divider who pits people against each other for amusement. Jesus came to lose, Trump is obsessed with winning. That's for sure. Okay, so, and then he says Donald Trump Jr. specifically rejected Jesus' Sermon on the Mount during a speech in 2021 when he said, "Turning the other cheek has gotten us nothing." So I don't think they're that keen on Jesus's words and Jesus's way of life. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so then on October 1st, we saw the shutdown in America begin. Okay, the beginning of the shutdown in America. And so I think that connects to Rachel, the story of Rachel in Genesis, who dies like they're getting close to the promised land and Rachel dies. Okay. And it says it came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she was in severe labor. She was in childbirth. Okay. And she named her son Ben-Onim, but his father called him Benjamin. Okay, so I thought that was interesting that her son like has two names. He's either the son of my sorrow or the son of my right hand. Okay, and so people in America that aren't big Trump fans see Trump more. Okay, see Trump more as the son of our sorrow, whereas Trump's followers would call him the son of my right hand. Okay, see the right hand. Okay, Trump being on the right. Okay, I also think there's another hidden story in those two names where Trump would be the son of the sorrow, and then the son of my right hand would be the Messiah. Okay, so so the picture of the two of the Antichrist and the Messiah. Okay, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And then Jacob set up a pillar over her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Okay, which I think is a picture of, God's people are going to journey on and move beyond Trump. Okay. And then we see during the shutdown that Trump wants to fire people and not pay others, which is a picture of Pharaoh having slaves. Okay. If you don't pay people, they're your slaves. Okay. And then what we're seeing too with air traffic control is the airports are deteriorating by the day. Okay. And so we actually saw on November 7th that they're starting to reduce some of the air traffic. They want to get it down to 10% at 40 U.S. airports. So there's that 40 number again, okay? And that was actually on the 40th day after Trump and Netanyahu announced the ceasefire on 9/29. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Okay, that's probably a big picture there. And I talked about, so we're still seeing lots of plane crashes and plane events, and I see that as, so I think God's trying to send a picture of that what goes up must come down, that at some point these people that are all on the top of the world are going to fall. Okay. And then so we're seeing plane crashes and near misses. I don't think anything's really been blamed on the air traffic control by the grace of God so far. But we do see a lot of the air traffic control people are definitely under a lot of stress. Okay. Um, so, um, and then what we saw on November 5th was the 5th week of the shutdown. Okay. And so they said on that day it was 36th day of the shutdown. So one of the longest shutdowns. Um, but it actually, okay. And so I put 6 by 6 for by 36. Okay. Because I thought that was kind of interesting. But I think we're approaching 40. Tomorrow is going to be day 40. So, um, and so far up to this point, the COVID shutdown was longer. Okay, but the COVID shutdown was 40 days. Okay, so that's why tomorrow is such a big, significant day. So, in my mind, okay, and then, um, and so then we read about time, times, and half a time. Okay, and so in these verses, Daniel is looking. Okay, so I should have circled look because whenever I see looked or eyes, I connect that to the two witnesses. And then we saw two others standing, one on this bank of the river and the other on the other bank of the river. Okay, so the river is Tigris and it flows east of Assyria. Okay, so remember, east connects to the right. Okay, so I think these are Trump and Netanyahu standing on the bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, this could be a picture of Jesus. How long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. Okay. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these will be completed. Okay. So, um, so 24 days after October 13th. So October 13th was the day that, so the ceasefire actually started October 10th. Okay. But then on October 13th, was when the hostages were let go. Okay, and then that was actually the day that Trump, he was at the Knesset in Israel. Okay, and then he went on to Egypt on that day. Okay, so definitely, and it was the let's see, 7th day of Sukkot. Okay, so definitely very significant. Okay, and also what was interesting too about October 13th was it was the 9th month, 11th day of the 119th Congress. Okay. Um, so I thought that was very interesting. So then what we see is, so 24 days later, which would be 3.5 weeks, was November 5th. Okay. And so then what I think is, I think then we moved into borrowed time. And so I think the covenant with many for 1 week is, I think God gave us this week time frame, which like would connect to like a second Sukkot, or also would be like a second Passover. Okay, and so that's November 6th through the 12th. Okay, and so then that's why November 9th is really interesting to me because it's the 4th day of this week. Okay, so I'm wondering if like Trump's living on borrowed time. So Trump had time, times, and half a time. And then God said, okay, I'm going to give him one more week. But in the middle of this week, maybe something's going to happen. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. Okay. And then, so we read in Revelation 11:9 that it says, those from the people, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. So actually, for 3.5 weeks, we've been seeing, Hamas, like slowly returning the dead bodies of the hostages, for 3.5 weeks. Okay. And, and for some reason, Hamas won't give the dead bodies back to Israel so they can bury them. Okay, and I thought it was interesting that this is Revelation 11:9. So because that's the date tomorrow. Um, so we see 9/11 clues in hidden in Back to the Future. And so Marty actually, okay, so Marty arrived the mall. The clock actually said, the Twin Pines Mall actually said 1:15, and then it changed to 1:16. Okay, and 1:16, when you turn it around, it's an upside down 9/11. Okay. So the 1:15 of the 1:16, first of all, that connects to November 5th to 6th, which is the 1 year anniversary of when we voted Trump in. Okay, so we voted Trump in on November 5th, and then on November 6th was when they actually said um, he was the winner. Because there's that 6 number there. Okay, so Marty arriving the mall. One, it could be a picture of, so we moved into the time of Babylon with Trump, okay, on 11/5 to 11/6. Okay. Also, it was called the Twin Pines Mall, which connects to the 2 witnesses. Okay. So, but actually, it could also connect to the people on the right and the people on the left. Okay. I mean, I think kind of all the stories about like the 2 towers and the left and the right, you know, connect to both. Either there's 2 stories being told at the same time. It's either Israel and America, or the left in America and the right in America, and very possibly the left in Israel and the right in Israel. Okay. So Trump and Netanyahu announced their peace deal on 9/29, which was a hidden 9/11. Okay. So they are the ones that are saying peace and safety. Okay. So then let's talk about riots in America, because at the end of October, we saw people posting videos about pillaging Walmart and Costco if the SNAP benefits were cut off. Okay. And so we've been really kind of watching since November 1st if riots were going to start. Okay. Because that was kind of when they thought they might start. But so far we haven't seen anything. But then I thought, okay, I want to look in the Word of God and see if there's anything in the Word of God that talks about possible rioting in America. Okay. And so in Luke 21:24, it says, they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So if you think of the Gentiles as being like the enemies of God, okay, like they're not God's people, okay, and then Jerusalem too, like we see a lot in the Bible where it talks about Jerusalem, then it talks about Zion. And so I think Jerusalem is a prophetic shadow of America, and Zion is the prophetic shadow of Israel. So it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. So actually, the rioting in America could be considered, like armies surrounding Jerusalem. Okay. And so what it tells us to do, if we're in Judea, which means like we belong to Jesus, we want to flee to the mountains. Okay. Remember they told Lot to flee to the mountains. Okay. When Sodom was going to be destroyed. Okay. If you're in the city, you want to get out. If you're in the country, don't go into the city. Okay. And so these verses have actually been true since we saw the start of the BLM rioters. Okay. Because it says, for these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Because it says, for there be great distress upon the earth and wrath against these people. So I think we're going to see the left. Well, first of all, wrath against the people would be God's wrath against his enemies, but also would be like the left displaying their wrath against Trump, and then it'd be the right fighting against the left with their wrath. Okay. um but we have been seeing Trump sending the National Guard. He sent it to Chicago and to Memphis, and then he said he was going to send some troops to Israel. I don't really follow that up. I don't really know what happened with that. But then we've seen ICE sent to various cities. And so I don't know if the National Guard goes with them or there's some kind of police force to protect them. But it actually gets kind of messy when ICE is doing their work. So I think that's all I had to say about that. Okay. And so another reason why I'm thinking the riots in America, like why it wouldn't surprise me if we go back to the rioting in America, like seeing a return of the BLM rioters. So the BLM rioters, so they first started out, they were rioting for Black Lives Matter, and then I believe they kind of morphed and became the ones that were rioting / protesting on the at the universities, and they were kind of like pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people. And then we saw the No Kings rioters, and I don't know if there's other ones, but they kind of like, they have different reasons for protesting, but basically in their heart they're just men of war. So but I believe it's all kind of the same people. Okay. Now we want to look at God's the pictures, that God does, the patterns. That's the word I was looking for. We want to look at God's patterns to understand what we might expect. Okay, so in January 28th, Trump had what he called his deal of the century. And it was basically his way of dividing the land of Israel, to provide a state for the Palestinians. And so he announced that on January 28th. And really nothing came of it because the Palestinians rejected it. Okay. But we still suffered God's punishment for that. Okay. And so 7 weeks after his deal of the century was when we entered into the COVID shutdown. Okay. And then 120 days later was the start of the George Floyd riots. And 190 days later was the explosion in Lebanon. And we really kind of entered into, I called it a fiery furnace time frame, because we had tons of fires, like in California. It was a fiery time. Okay. And so I'm thinking that these patterns match kind of what we see in the Bible. And so the COVID shutdown would kind of match Joseph in the Bible being in prison, would kind of match that. The George Floyd riots would connect to the lion's den that we see in Daniel. And then the fiery furnace, we read about that in Daniel too. Okay. And so, okay, so then on 9/29, so I talked about this, that's when Trump and Netanyahu made this, new peace proposal. Someone has actually called it the deal of the millennium. Okay, so that's that diluting influence. If you're calling something a deal of the millennium, you're really diluted. Okay. But I like to use that because it's short. Okay. And it matches the deal of the century. Okay. So what we saw with the deal of the millennium is like 3 days later, rather than 7 weeks, we entered into a US shutdown. Okay. On 10/1. Okay. So the COVID shutdown actually lasted 40 days. Okay. But then, I mean, it's not totally clear because then Trump kind of opened it up to the states, and so different states opened at different times. Okay. Um, but we definitely want to keep an eye on, like, the 40th day of the shutdown would be 11/9. Okay. Um, and which is would be 42 days after Trump and Netanyahu, proposed their deal of the millennium. Okay. Um, and then that's why I wouldn't be surprised if we saw riots in the United States on 11/9. Um, and then sometime after that, or at the same time, some kind of fiery furnace in Israel. Now, Israel's already kind of been under a fiery furnace because, like I said, all these terrorists were let go, and so they're still like suffering. There's not peace in Israel. They're still suffering terrorism problems with the people in Hamas and Gaza, and problems with the people in the West Bank. But then now too, like, they thought they had Hezbollah taken care of, but Hezbollah is rearing its ugly head too. Okay. Um, but I don't know if there's like an ultimate fulfillment, like if Iran has had this plan for a really long time to attack Israel. And so we could see Iran maybe bomb Israel, maybe bomb them with nuclear weapons. So that Trump thinks he got rid of, but I don't think he did. So, of course, I can't say I know for sure. I just tend to know that if Trump says something, that most likely it's not true. Um, like, I just think it's too pie in the sky. Like, oh yeah, we took care of Iran, but Iran is like, I mean, if you understand what drives Iran, they want to get rid of Israel, and so they're not gonna let a little bombing slow them down. And no one's actually, I don't think anyone's ever actually been in there to inspect the nuclear places in Iran. Um, so, and they were built way underground, and so, um, some people have said yes, they were destroyed, but other people are like, yeah, we're not too sure. So, who are you gonna believe? This is where you just kind of have to wait and see what happens in the history. So, um, okay, so then, um, okay, so then, okay, so I have some other verses about the riots. Okay. So in Luke 23, Jesus said, "For if they do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Okay, so if you cut off their SNAP benefits, what are they going to do? I mean, so we saw them rioting during BLM, and there wasn't even really anything that affected them, but what are they going to be like if you take away their SNAP benefits and their airplane flights? Okay. So we also read in the Bible about 3 days of darkness, and so that's during in Egypt, right before the Exodus. Okay, and what's interesting about that is the story of the 3 days of darkness are actually preceded by locust. So maybe it's two stories telling the same thing. The locust, or the two plagues, kind of pointing to the same thing, because the locusts, definitely connect to rioters. Okay, and 3 days of darkness could connect if the rioting goes on for 3 days. Okay. And then in Luke 21:24 it says, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Sorry, I already read that verse. Okay. Jeremiah 2 says, "The young lions have roared at him. They have roared loudly, and they have made his land a waste. His cities have been destroyed. without inhabitants. So is that a prophecy about riots in America? So that would connect to like the lion's den. Okay, so see how it says his cities have been destroyed, his land was made of waste. Okay. So that would kind of, prove that, me looking at the lion's den as like, rioters really kind of connects. Okay. In Jeremiah 6, it says, "Flee for safety, O sons of Benjamin, from the midst of Jerusalem. The comely and dainty one, the daughter of Zion, I will cut off." Okay, so Jerusalem is called the daughter of Zion. So remember I said like the Christians are the women. Okay. "Arise and let us attack by night and destroy her palaces and cast up a siege against Jerusalem. This is the city to be punished, in whose midst there is only oppression." Okay, oppression because of Trump. Okay, "Violence and destruction are heard in her. For from the least of them even to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for gain. Hear, O earth, behold, I am bringing disaster on this people, because they have not listened to my words. Do not go out into the field, and do not walk on the road, for the enemy has a sword. Terror is on every side." Okay. So if these verses are a prophecy of this coming rioting in America, it tells us what we should do. We're not supposed to go into the field, and we're not supposed to walk on the road. So basically we need to stay in our houses. Okay. And then it says, "And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire." So the 10 horns, I believe, connect to the 10 spies who didn't have faith. Okay. And so these would be all the people in America that don't have faith in God. Okay. And so they hate America and they want to burn her up with fire. Revelation 18 says, "And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong." Okay, so this one talks about one day. And so I've kind of been questioning, would the rioters be 3 days or one day? Okay, so we'll just have to wait and see on that. So because this one says in one day her plagues will come, but that could just be the start of it. So, 3 days of darkness could be the time. So maybe we have the rioters on 11/9, and then on 10 and 11. Well, so then 11/9 would be the first day of darkness, and then 10/11 would just be days of darkness where we're like waiting for Jesus to show up, and maybe Jesus shows up on November 12th, which would be the 7th day of the second Passover, like the last day. Okay, I don't know, I'm just guessing. Okay. In Isaiah 54 it says, "For the Lord has called you like a wife forsaken and grieved in spirit, even like a wife of one's youth when she is rejected, says your God. For a brief moment I forsook you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In an outburst of anger I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting loving kindness I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. O afflicted ones, storm-tossed and not comforted, behold, I will set your stones in antimony, and your foundations I will lay in sapphires. In righteousness you will be established. You will be far from oppression, for you will not fear, and from terror, for it will not come near you." So we read about God in his anger, hiding his face, from us for a moment. Okay, so that's kind of why I have a problem with the rapture theory. Okay, because it just doesn't match um, kind of what we read in the word. Okay. And so if we see something like rioting in America, remember that, what is the expression? Weeping may last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Like it's just going to be a short time until Jesus shows up and brings us joy. Okay. So we just got to hang in there for a moment. Okay. Because then God's going to bring his everlasting loving kindness on us and his compassion. And so these are some verses also to encourage you during the rioting. Psalm 91, definitely pull out your Bible and read that because it's a great psalm. It says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty." So you want your booth, your shelter, to be in, God's shelter. Okay, you don't want to be in Trump's Sukkot or Netanyahu's Sukkot or Biden's Sukkot or Obama's Sukkot. You want to be in Jesus's Sukkot. Okay, I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. Okay, so see, we read about deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a bulwark. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, or of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or of the destruction that lays waste at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High your dwelling place. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. Okay, so see, you want to stay in your house, your tent. Okay. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. But those who survived fled to the hill country. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. Okay, so we read about, like, they went after their food supply. Okay. So this is in Genesis 14 where it's 4 kings versus 5. Okay, so that can be a picture of the left versus the right. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah could be a picture of Trump and Netanyahu, or it could be like Trump versus the left. Okay, and they fell into tar pits. Okay, so we read about tar in Genesis 11 in the Tower of Babel, that they used tar instead of mortar. Okay, to build their towers. Okay, to build their cities. Okay, so that's where you're using an Antichrist figure, to put your hope in instead of the Messiah. Okay, and then, but in the story, so read that one too, because Abraham actually goes and he gets Lot and he gets all the food supply. So Abraham is the messianic type figure in that story. So it's got a happy ending. Okay. And in Psalm 57 it says, "And in the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by. My soul is among lions." Okay. So we want to take refuge in the shadow of God's wings. Sorry, I'm really congested. Okay, so then we also read about, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. It says, "Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw, he rose to meet him and bowed down with his face to the ground. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. But they said, 'Stand aside.' Furthermore, they said, 'This one came in as an alien, and already he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them.' So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door." Okay. "They struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway." So they can't find the doorway. So I think that's a promise from God, is that they won't be able to find our doors. But don't forget, the biggest important thing is Jesus is the door. So hopefully Jesus is your door, okay? Protecting your house, your family. So at the beginning we see a little bit of a shadow. It says the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate. And then when Lot saw, so you see that saw would connect to the two witnesses. So like the two angels in the beginning could be like Trump and Netanyahu. Because then we have Lot bowing down with his face to the ground, and that would connect to Daniel bows down with his face to the ground, um, to a messianic type figure. Okay. So we could see a little bit of a shadow of talking about what Trump and Netanyahu did. And so it's interesting. It said as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom, like, so that, so Trump and Netanyahu, they came with this ceasefire thing when Israel was so close to overcoming Gaza. Okay. And then seeing if there's anything else I want to say about this. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. So this story, it says the men reached out and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So there's two different ways I could see that maybe it's a picture of how Jesus is around when the riots start, that the riots start at the same time that Jesus comes. That's kind of something I've been kicking around, because then there's someone who can reach out and pull you into the house. But then also too, there's the story where, so it goes on to say, like for Abraham's sake, God remembers Lot, so God is gonna save some of our family members that, maybe they start with this rioting, okay, but then they get snatched out of the fire and brought into the house, okay. And it only because of the righteousness of their family members and the belief of their family members that have been praying for them. So God will remember our wayward relatives when destruction comes. Okay. Exodus 12 says, "You shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes. And the people bowed down low and worshiped." Okay. So definitely, I think we're going to see kind of a repeat of the Passover. Okay. And because it means God passed over the houses of his people in Egypt, okay, but he smote the Egyptians, okay, so God's gonna spare our homes, okay. John 2:19 says, okay, so remember Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up. So that's why I'm saying when you see rioters, you just gotta wait for 3 days, because then Jesus is gonna come back, and he's gonna come back 3 days after destruction, okay. And so this verse, so this is definitely a prophetic shadow, but it also means, like, it kind of goes against all those people that don't believe that America is a type of temple, okay, and don't believe Israel is a type of temple, okay. So because I believe it's a prophetic shadow that when America gets destroyed and Israel gets destroyed, in 3 days Jesus is going to return and rebuild. There's going to be a new Jerusalem and a new heaven and a new earth, okay. Okay, and then I want to talk about too, like why I really think that Trump is in his last days. Okay, because I believe that Trump only gets 1 year. Okay, the problem with that is that I don't know when God started the 1 year time clock. Okay, so if we did the 1 year time clock on November 5th and November 6th when he was voted in, then we are definitely like very near the end. Okay. Um, so, but that could be wishful thinking on my part. We'll just have to see what happens. But the reason why I believe Trump only gets 1 year is because in Genesis 17 it says, "And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said, no, but Sarah your wife will bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and will make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. He shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, who Sarah will bear to you at this season next year." Okay, so really get out your Bible and read this whole passage, because this is where God makes um, a huge promise to Abraham. Okay, and if you understand the Ishmael Isaac story, okay, so Ishmael came out of the concubine Hagar. Okay, um, he wasn't of the flesh of Abraham and Sarah. Okay, um, and so God's promise was um, that that Abraham and Sarah would have a son and he would be called Isaac. Okay, so Isaac is a messianic figure. Ishmael is the antichrist figure. Okay. Because what it says about Ishmael is, he will be a wild donkey and his hand will be against everyone. Okay, so Trump is definitely fulfilling um the prophecies of Ishmael. Okay. Um, but God gives Ishmael, so God's telling Abraham, hey, you're gonna have a son and he's gonna be called Isaac. And Abraham actually says, what about Ishmael? Let Ishmael live before you. And God said, well, first he said no, but he actually said, well, Ishmael will get blessed and be fruitful for a year. Okay. But you will have Isaac within a year. Okay. So what's interesting about 11/9 is that last year on 11/9/2024, that was when the Jews read Genesis 17:7-27. Okay. And so that would be the 1 year anniversary of these promises that God made in the Bible about Isaac. Okay. Um, it's also the anniversary of Kristallnacht. Okay. Which last year it was the 86th year of Kristallnacht. It's 87th this year. Okay. Remember Kristallnacht? Okay, so that was the start of World War II. They called it the Night of Broken Windows, Night of Broken Glass, or broken windows. You know, so um um and then we saw Einstein's clock in Back to the Future was 118, and it changes to 119 when Doc is sending him into the future in Back to the Future. So 11/9/25 is also Chesvon 18. Okay, so maybe that's a prophetic shadow. So definitely it's definitely a high watch date. And like I said, the election for Trump was 11/5 to 11/6. And then yeah, we already talked about this. Marty to the mall. Okay, we already talked about that. Okay. So these are the Einstein clocks. Okay, Back to the Future, Einstein time travel. You could watch the video on YouTube. It's best movie scenes. Okay, Einstein's clock 118 changes to 119 when Doc is sending him into the future. And then what's interesting about that is, so that's the scene that gives us this picture. that says out of time. Okay, so is burning on the left and burning on the right connected to like a civil war, which is connected to we're out of time in America? What's interesting too is that this license plate, it says August, okay, which is the 8th month. Okay, well, we're past August, but we're in the month of Chesvan on the Hebrew calendar, which is the 8th month. Okay. It's interesting that, it's California is being called the Golden State. Okay, because we actually saw Trump on November 5th. Okay, so on November 4th was election day, and the Democrats like just won a bunch of races on November 4th. But we had Trump on November 5th. And so they said the reason why a lot of people voted for the Democrats is that they're not happy with the economy. And so we had Trump defending the economy on November 5th. Okay. And he actually called it the golden age of America. Okay. Which what's interesting about that is that in the 8th month in the Bible, Jeroboam actually sets up a pseudo Sukkot, okay, and we actually already saw Trump doing that on the in August, okay, when I can't remember now, was that August 15th? No, maybe not. I think it connected to. Okay, wait, I have to get my May calendar out. It might have connected to when he was in, yeah, I think it was when he was in the Middle East. Okay. And it was the 8th month then, because Nisan could be considered the 1st month or the 8th month. Okay. And, so actually on, let's see. Okay. I'm not finding this. I think I talked about this in a previous video. Sorry, I can't find the dates right now. But it has to do with, so Trump was talking about the golden age of America and the golden age of like the Middle East. Okay, whenever he said that. And the time frame of that connected to the 8th month, the 15th day, which was Jeroboam's feast in the Bible. Okay. And Jeroboam sets up 2 golden calves. Okay. So this is why I'm not finding it. I pulled out my May 2024 calendar. No, that's not what I need. Okay, I need my May. That's why it's not working. Okay. Oh. Actually, it was the month of Iyar on the 15th was when Trump was in the Middle East. Okay, when he went to visit the Middle East. Okay, so he went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Qatar, he went to UAE on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of May. And that's when he talked about the golden age of America connecting with the golden age of the Middle East. Okay, so we definitely big time fulfilled the prophecy of Jeroboam. Okay. But then we saw him, like, he only talked about one golden age on November 5th. Okay. But definitely kind of a repeat. Okay. And then what's interesting about, so November 6th was, what I said was, the start of this second Passover, or Jeroboam's pseudo Sukkot, or a second Sukkot. And so it was actually on the 5th, I believe, that Trump said the golden age of America again. But if you look at November 6th, it's actually Chesvan. So Trump on the 5th would be talking about the golden age of America on the eve of Sukkot, Jeroboam's pseudo Sukkot. Okay. And then so November 6th is actually Chesvan 15, 57, 86. And so it would be that if you take the 15 and you add those together, you get 6. So it's the 8th month, like the 6th day. You get another, you get 86. But then it's interesting that we're in the year 5786 because you have a second 86 there. And then this number 2, and so this license plate says California 86. And then if you look at these numbers 52, 654 under 86, there's a hidden 911 in there too. The 5 plus 4 is 9. 6, 7, 8. How do we get 11? Let me think. Oh, not counting the 2, but the 6 plus the 5 add up to 11. So a hidden 911 in there. So definitely interesting. And then the middle of the week. So this slide, I wanted to show you that I think there's been multiple fulfillments about the middle of the week. Okay. But I also think, because it says, and he shall make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. Whenever it says he, we don't really know who it's talking about until we find out how it's fulfilled. But I believe that, we could be in the time frame where God's making a strong covenant with the many for 1 week, is either the second Sukkot or the second Passover. Okay. And then it says for half of the week there's an end to sacrifice and offering. So is that rioting for half of the week? I'm not sure. But we saw several fulfillments. On the 4th day of the first Sukkot, the ceasefire started on October 10th. Okay. So that was an end to sacrifice and offering in the middle of that week. 7 weeks after 9/29 would make the 5th week being 11/3 to 11/9. So anyways, so the middle, so an end to sacrifice and offering could be like in the middle of that week, could be the election. Like people voted for the Democrats instead of the Republicans. Okay. October 13th through December 1st is 7 weeks. The middle of that is 11/5, which is 3.5 weeks, day 24. So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, same thing that could connect to the election. So anyways, but then November 6th to November 12th, like I said, I already talked about this, is 1 week, the second Passover. November 9th is day 4. Are we going to see rioting on 11/9, 10/11? Are we going to see a stop to the rioting on November 12th when Jesus shows up? I'm not sure. So we just got to wait and see what happens. So here's Trump with this hat. So it's interesting to me that he's running around with this hat that has a hidden 9/11 on it. Okay. So we want to pay attention to 9/11 dates or 11/9 dates. Okay. And let's see. Okay, so here's Trump in the Middle East, 5/13 and 10/13. What's interesting about, so there's 5 months between 5/13 and 10/13. Okay. 10/13 was when the hostages got released, and like I said, Trump was in Egypt signing. Actually, I don't know if this picture might be from 10/13 when he was in Egypt. So I mean, all the pictures would probably look really similar. But what happened on 10/13 is that was when Trump, they signed the Trump Declaration for Enduring Peace and Prosperity. It was signed by Trump, El-Sisi of Egypt, El-Thani of Qatar, and Erdogan of Turkey. Okay, so I thought it was interesting that there was 5 months between 5/13 and 10/13. Okay. So then I'm wondering if, because there was 5 months between these two things, if that's why are seeing that, I mean, we got up to 5 weeks of the shutdown on November 5th. So I thought that was interesting. You know, is there a connection? I'm not sure. Um, um, and then there's a plan too to build a Qatar Air Force base in the United States. That was announced on 10/10. Okay. Um, so we read about in the Gospels that Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den." Okay, so the buyers and the sellers are Trump and his peeps, okay? And they're the money changers, and they're the ones that are selling doves, okay? Making all these deals with, these quote unquote ceasefires and supposed peace deals. Um, so I talked about this in my last video. So Trump and Netanyahu, we read about while they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. So we saw on October 7th, Netanyahu was running around talking about how great Biden's Saudi deal was, and then Israel got attacked on October 7th. So what's going to happen now that Netanyahu is running around talking about how great Trump's thing is, and all these other people too, like Trump's administration, they're all running to Israel to talk about how great Trump's thing is. Okay. So a lot of people saying peace and safety. So we'll see what happens. So I talked about how the YouTube prophets are missing it. They say the U.S. is not in Bible prophecy. I think Jerusalem talks about the U.S. They say the 7-year tribulation is still to come. I think actually today is the end of the 15-year tribulation that started in 2010. So today's November 8th. Cheswan 17 was when the Great Flood began 15 years ago. Okay, that's another reason why I'm thinking we could be near the end. They say AI is the Antichrist, or the Antichrist will use AI. They won't explore the notion of Trump being the Antichrist. So either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. Jesus said, "You hypocrites, you know how to analyze the appearance of the earth and sky, but why do you not analyze this present time? And why do you not, even on your own initiative, judge what is right?" Okay, they're still talking about the rapture. The verse that says, "Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we shall always be with the Lord." So think of meeting the Lord in the air is as opposed to being with the people of the beast of the earth, or as opposed to being with the people of the beast of the sea. Okay. They say that no one will know the day or the hour. They are still waiting for the temple to be rebuilt. They don't see Israel as a type of temple, and they don't see America as a type of temple. Okay. Okay, and so here's some specific examples. Okay. John Haller, who's from Fellowship Bible Chapel, I think is the name of it, in Ohio. He hates the ceasefire, but he can't make the leap to Trump being the Antichrist. Okay. The Athey Creek pastor, who does once a month prophecy updates, he said the Trump peace deal is a good thing. But he also says maybe it's the foundation for the Antichrist deal. But he specifically said Trump is not the Antichrist in his October prophecy update. Okay, and then Shalom and Messiah Ministries did a YouTube video called Back to October 6, 2023 with Tom Hughes on 10/16/25. Tom Hughes said, okay, here you could go look at 25 minutes, 23 seconds. Tom Hughes says, for anyone to say Trump is the Antichrist is kind of silly. At 2416, Melnick of Shalom and Messiah Ministries says, okay, many, like something like people are saying that Trump is the Antichrist. So, I don't think he is. Okay. Um, and then, and I don't remember who said this, but we get accused of Trump derangement syndrome if we call Trump the Antichrist. That might have been a political person that said that. I'm not sure. So I wish I remembered who said that. Anyways, so I thought that was interesting. So only time will tell, huh? Um, so, um, so this verse here, it says, "Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." Okay. I mean, so I put the Gaza picture in here, but I could also put the picture of the White House that was torn down. I mean, there's another one, of Trump displaying himself as being God, making this decision to tear down half the White House or the wing of the White House. So I highlighted, "Let no one in any way deceive you." Okay. Um, don't be deceived by Trump. Okay. And so someone like put a comment on one of my videos and they said, "Well, the apostasy hasn't come first yet." Okay. If you if you don't think the apostasy hasn't come yet, then you aren't really aware of what America used to be like in its heyday when God was really important. Okay. Um um but I also think the apostasy too was, we saw kind of the falling away of the Republican Party when they threw away, abortion as one of their important beliefs, guidelines. So like the Republican Party had a big falling away. So, and then if you don't recognize that Trump is the man of lawlessness and the son of destruction, you know, and so it was interesting that he made his Gaza announcement on 2:4, because it's 2 Thessalonians 2:4, which says he opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. So we saw him displaying himself as being God, like in control of Gaza, okay, on 2:4. But then we also saw that, he announced on 9/29 that he is going to head the board of peace for Gaza, okay. So definitely exalts himself, okay. And it was interesting too, because when he talked about being the head of the board of peace, he was humbly trying to say it. So kind of interesting. So I actually watched the Omen movie. I figured out if you like mute the Omen movie, it's not as scary because it's the music, the way the music gets faster and faster, and that makes you really nervous. Okay, that adds to the scare factor of the Omen. But I wanted to see if God gave us some Antichrist signs in the Omen movie, and he did. Okay. So in the priest room, the priest had 47 crosses. Okay, Trump is the 47th president. Okay, the priest had 666 on his right thigh. Okay, Trump is a president from the right side of the political scale. Damien was born on June 6th at 6 a.m. Okay, Trump was born. So they got that right, where Damien was born in June and Trump was born in June. Okay. Although you could actually get a couple other sixes out of, if you take the 14 and add it to the 1, that's 4 plus 1 plus 1 is another 6, and then it's 1946 gives you a third 6. So the priest had Bible pages even on his windows. Okay, so remember I said Trump is the window and Jesus is the door. And they actually said in this movie, the devil's child will rise from the world of politics. And I thought they were pretty right on with that one. Okay. Um, because definitely Trump, the Antichrist from the world of politics. Okay. The first priest in the movie had a messed up right eye. Okay, so we got the right, Trump being on the right, but also eye connects to Trump being one of the two witnesses. Okay, so Damien, so he was the son of Ambassador Thorne. So I'm assuming his last name would be Thorne, Damien Thorne. So put that right next to Donald Trump. And Damien has the same number of letters as Donald. They both start with D. Thorne is the same number of letters as Trump, and they both start with T. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Okay, um, we see a trumpet playing taps at the funeral. So that would be kind of a shadow of Trump. Okay, in the last days, playing taps. It was a double funeral, mother and father, and so I think we're gonna see kind of the fall of America and the fall of Israel. Okay, Gregory Peck was the star of the movie. If you count up the letters in his name, you get 7 plus 4 would connect to, like, Trump being 47, but it also adds up to 11, which adds up to judgment in the last days. The movie was made in 1976. The second movie was made in 1978. So we have Trump being the sixth king and the eighth king. So Jeremiah 9:11, it says, okay, the Jewish people read Jeremiah 9:11 on Tisha B'Av, which is their 9/11 or the 9th of Av, is their 9th day on their 11th month. I think that's how that works. And so Jeremiah 9:11 says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. Okay, so this is another one of those verses where you see, like, Jerusalem is kind of talked about differently than the cities of Judah. Okay, so that's one example of how, so Jerusalem could be a shadow of America, and it says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals. So that could be a picture of the lion's den, the rioting in America. And then it says, I'll make the cities of Judah, which could be the nation of Israel, a desolation without inhabitant. That could be a picture of the fiery furnace. So that's why tomorrow, 11/9, is the high watch date. Don't forget that false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to mislead even the elect. So God is testing you to see if you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, or are you going to follow this prophet or dreamer of dreams who gives you a sign or wonder. So did you pass the test with Trump? Okay, Trump gave great signs and wonders. But did you, and so did you fall for that and started following him instead of hanging in there and waiting for Jesus? Okay. And then it says, those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Moshiach. We read in Jeremiah, it says, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. So God says, restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord, and they will return from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children will return to their own territory. So I always thought this verse was talking about Israel. Well, I don't know if I always thought about that, because Ramah is kind of a city in Ephraim's territory, I believe. Um, um, and so, but this kind of has new meaning when we think about the riots in America. So is Rachel weeping for her children a picture of um, America weeping for the destruction in America? And because one of the things too, like, there's actually a verse too that talks about they will come trembling, they will return to the Lord trembling. So our return to the Lord isn't like kind of described in happy terms. It's really, kind of, we hear about them trembling when they return to the Lord. Um, there's another verse too that I can't remember. Anyways, so the rapture theory really, got people off on the wrong foot. They're not prepared for, you know, um, maybe this hard time before Jesus actually returns. Um, and don't go either left or right. Um, don't join the sea of Trump. Don't join the sea of Biden, Obama, Harris. So then to this verse, the great city America split. Oh, the great city is split into three parts. So is that America? Is that showing a picture of the Civil War in America, the rioting in America? Um, so, um, anyways, because then it says the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Okay, every island fled away and the mountains could not be found. Okay, so if Trump is in the head of this Babylon, which I believe, he's going to be drinking the cup of God's, the wine of God, the cup of God's wine of wrath. Okay. Okay. So that's what I got for you now. So thank you so much for tuning in. I wish I kind of knew more clearly what was going on. Things are a little like I just don't really know. I have to wait and see. I just wanted to get this out because I just knew 11/9 was a high watch date. But we'll wait and see what happens and reevaluate and recalculate and everything to see what happens. So thank you so much for tuning in. I know times are hard right now. There's a lot of people suffering health issues and persecution and just a lot of other things. And did I put that verse in here about how we wear out the saints? I think I forgot I was going to put that verse in here too about the Antichrist wearing out the saints. Okay, so we're definitely all weary in America with this shutdown. Um, um, you know, so, anyways, and then I'm taking one last look at my notes to see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Anyways, so I think we're all worn out. We're all, tired of the time frame. The labor pains are really getting to us. But hang in there, wait and attain for Jesus's return. Pray for God's strength. That God will give you the grace to face, what we're going to go through. I wish I put that verse in here too. So, anyways, but definitely put oil in your lamps, which would be the word of God. Okay. So thanks so much for tuning in. Take care. God bless.